Hello there, and welcome back to my painting channel. And as you can see, for this painting session, I am doing a Fyreslayer. So we're going to paint a Fyreslayer out of the Games Workshop army list. And I split this into 3 groups as a new format setup for my painting channel to try to give you an easy way of just selecting which parts that you would want to follow or any kind of paints. So we're going to start with part 1, which is the skin. And for this particular dwarf, we're going to have a really nice dark skin tone. We want this dwarf to be really, really unique. I like painting a lot of different skin tones on my miniatures because there's nothing worse than looking at an army where all of your army are the exact same paint job and the exact same skin tones. It's always nice to have variety with your skin. It's always nice to have a variety with your miniatures with the skin tones as well, because each miniature then, although you might have an army of 30, they all have different unique sort of colours, textures, tones, and that creates a lovely variety and a great depth to your army as well. So we're going to start with a base coat of Vallejo dark rust. Once your dark rust is dried, which it dries into this really nice matte effect. I use dark rust a lot for things like leather straps and things like that. But once that's dried, we're just going to go over that with an Army Painter purple tone. You could use a Citadel's Drugi Violet if you'd prefer, but for myself I like using the Army Painter shades and washes. They have a really unique way of sitting on the miniature and they dry to a real nice consistency. So once your purple tone is complete and dry as well, I'm going to move back to the dark rust, and then we're just going to build that colour back up, and we're just going to build that tone back up in the areas where like the raised points and the muscle points. So we're going to leave that purple sit in the recessed areas and in the gaps, and we're just going to build this base colour back up on top of those muscles, because we're going to highlight that then further as well. This is a really simple way of painting dark skin tones, but it has an amazing look to the miniatures. So this dwarf is really going to stand out in your army. It's going to look really unique and different. So this is a really cool way to go about it. So as I say, just keep on building this this base colour that we've used back up on those raised points, so building those muscles and building the muscle tones back up with this same colour while leaving the purple rest in the gaps. As you see, just going across the bicep and the shoulder here, just trying to refill that colour where it was. Don't forget as well to make sure that your paints are nice and thin, so that as you're painting your paints onto the miniature, that it does give plenty of room to dry, and it has a nice even tone, so that you don't end up with like one big blob and things like that. So what we're going to do is a little bit more complicated than normal, so we're just going to mix a couple of colours together. It's going to be the same 2 colours right through, so we've done our base coat, we've done our shade, and we've gone back to our base coat. So from there, what we're going to do is we're just going to use that dark rust colour that we started with. I'm just going to add a small blob of flat brown. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to try to mix this into a consistency of about 70% of the original colour to 30% of the new colour. That sounds all technical, but don't worry too much. The reason why I haven't showed you me mixing it and all things like that is because this is all down to complete personal choice. The colour that I've made here, that I've enjoyed making and mixing together, might be a slight different colour to the one that you might want to use. You might want to use one that's a little bit darker first and then tone up 3 or 4 times. You might only want to tone up once and just do a straight 50-50. So it's completely up to you. But what I'm doing here is just showing you sort of like what a little bit of a mixture would look like as we tone up, because this is my first highlight and I'll be using another one as well. So for this particular one, as I say, I'm using more of that dark rust to begin and just adding a little bit of the flat brown into that. The paint is also thinned, so it's thinned down nicely into the consistency of about, it should look like sort of like the consistency of milk really, so that the paint flows nice and smooth, but it does still have a little bit of colour and texture to it. So for the second highlight, Now I've added more of that flat brown to my mixture to create into about a 50-50 split mixture. And again, this is personal choice. Again, you could add more if you wanted to go highlight, if you wanted to go lighter, or you could add a little bit less if you wanted to tone that up in smaller increments and in smaller stages. But as I say, for myself, I've gone for straight away 70-30, so just a little bit of colour, and then into a half and half, so that we've still got that original colour that we used, that dark rust. So we've still got that original base tone, and for that then it's going to allow these colours to mix and blend into each other nicely without looking out of place. Sometimes if you use a different colour onto the darker base, you might find that it will look too bright or too overbearing or whichever. So this is just an option, an idea. This is just something that I wanted to play about with and see sort of what kind of really cool dark skin tones could I make. And this particular one is absolutely lovely. It looks really, really good when it dries on your miniature. Don't forget to cross his face as well, a little bit of the cheekbones and the nose. And that should be the skin. Nice and easy. Like I say, you can put as many layers into that as you like, or you can make it as simple as you like, as I've done here. And then we're just going to move on and do all of the different details. So for the first detail, I'm just going to do his beard. And of course, I don't want his beard to be really, really bright orange. We're going to keep this miniature quite dark. We're going to keep an element of him quite toned down. So we're just using a heavy charcoal for his beard. This is going to allow me to tone that up into being sort of like a little bit grey, so he's got little grey wispy beard hairs and so on and so on. It's going to be cool. And from there, then you're going to want to paint his tabard, and his wrist straps. Don't forget the wrist straps. We're going to paint these the same colour. For these, I'm using a flat earth from Vallejo, which is another sort of brown colour, but a very different tone of brown, this one. So this is a much lighter, a much warmer brown tone. And again, so although we're using a couple of different browns on our miniature, it's about trying to make them stand out so that they don't all blend into each other. You see how much those wrist guards now stand off from the skin tones? Those skin tones now really do look really, really sort of deep, full of contrast as well, which is fantastic. So from there, I'm going to move on and use Vallejo copper. You can use any copper you like. I mean, there's a few good metallic ranges on the market. I tend to use a lot of Vallejo paints. I've collected quite a lot over the years, so I'm tending to paint a lot with Vallejo. This particular colour does not take to the miniature in a single coat. This will require more than one coat. As you can see, it's not covering, or the coverage isn't perfect. So again, take your time, use thin coats, and put 2 or 3 on as you need to. For this, I'm doing the helmet. I'm also doing the belt and the metallics that are just sticking down the front of his tabard. And I'm also going to do the axes as well, so we'll try and tie a lot of the colours in together. What we're trying to do what I'm trying to do rather, with this miniature is, instead of painting him with orange beards and orange all over the miniature and light bright skin colours, what I've decided to do instead is to try to contrast this in a different way. So the contrast is trying to use dark skin tones, dark beard tones, but then use the copper and the orange on the metallics instead. So we're highlighting the metallics while keeping the more natural base colours and base tones darker. That was the idea when I first started. I'll be honest with you, when I started to paint this miniature, the only thing I had in mind was that I wanted to paint dark skin tones. Everything else I've done completely on the fly. I have no plan. I've just sat down and thought, that would be a cool colour. Or, I haven't used my Vallejo copper yet, so I'm just going to try that and see how it comes out. And this is kind of what we've done. It's kind of freestyling. We freestyle in a Fyreslayer just to see what we can do. So you'll have to let me know in the comments if you think my freestyling has worked, if you like the colours. If you don't, you're more than welcome to let me know. If you like the colours and you want to follow on, I've put the colours in the descriptions and everything like that as well. So, like I said, trying to use the contrast of the dark skin versus the really sort of bright colours then. We're going to use his plume and we're going to paint this up a red. I'm using this Vallejo red, which is a really cool base colour red, because it's got, it's not a very sort of like bright overbearing red. It's got a really cool sort of depth to it. It's kind of a darker red, and I know you can't see that, but it does come out as a darker red, and we'll highlight that in a bit. For the handles, just trying to make something a little bit different. I didn't want to go back and just use more brown because we've done such a dark skin tone and we've got browns on his tabard. I wanted to try doing something a little bit different. So for that we're using a very dark green. This is a military green, and this dries again in a matte effect, and it also dries very dark, which is quite cool. It's got a different kind of colour, and it creates a little bit more colour to look at on the miniature than just the same bits of brown here and there and whichever. So we're going to fill out some of the silver bits, the tongues on the dragons, the corner points to the axes. They stick out from the axe itself, so I'm going to paint those silver even though the axes are copper. Again, giving a little bit of depth, a little bit of tone, creating a little bit more to look at so that the miniature isn't just one flat colour. Like I said again though, this is all completely freestyle. I haven't planned this. This is just as I'm painting, I'm thinking, oh, that would be cool, that would look different, that would look unique. How can we make him look a little bit more an individual, a hero of his own, and sort of a full, like a unit leader then. How can he stand out from the crowd and things like that. Just trying to be careful with the silver though, because of the way that it does connect to the copper. I want to just try to be a little bit more careful, because we don't want the metallics especially to sort of mix together then, or you know, get one on the other. Just take your time with these little bits. So once you've done all of the detailed points, we're at that stage where we think, yep, we're going to shade these down. For those shades, we're just going to use a Army Painter dark tone. Like I said, I like using Army Painter washes and shades. That doesn't mean that you've got to use the exact same thing. I know a lot of people enjoy using their Citadel shades and colours. So if you're a Citadel user, you can use Null and Oil. It will give you a similar sort of effect. This is just a black wash essentially. And we're just going to go over all those details that we've painted, so the wrist guards, the tabard, the beard, all across the helm, as you see here, just up and across the red and across the copper and things like that. And just tie in the colours together now so that it doesn't look too bright. There you go, you'll start to see a lot more of the detail come out of the miniature when you put the shade on, because the shade will naturally just sit into that recessed area. Try your best not to put too much in an area. As you see on the helmet here, I've kind of put a bit too much on, so what I'll do is I'll take the shade off my brush, clean my brush, and then I'll use the brush just to manipulate a little bit of that shade and get some of that back off, because we don't want it to be too dark there. So to regain a lot of the colours, we're going to do quite a bit of dry brushing first. And to start with the dry brushing, as I said, the beard, we're going to want to use a little bit of a grey, so we're going to build up like a grey tone so that his beard looks dark, but also light at the same time. So for this I'm using a blue grey pale. You can use sort of any kind of mid-tone grey that you like. This particular one, because it's got a slight hint of blue to the grey, there's a bit more colour to it, so it's not just a flat colour, and that's why I've chosen and opted for that one. From there then, you just want to dry brush the very tips, so the very edges, so we're just highlighting the very edges this time. And for this one I'm using a sky grey, but you can use any lighter grey. Even if you wanted to use the same grey that you were using like as your mid-tone and mix that with a highlight, you can. But the idea for this one is we're not covering the whole beard, we're just trying to catch the very raised and edged point. So we're just trying to catch the real sort of tips of the beard. So continuing on with our dry brushing, we are going to dry brush the copper back up on the weapons. So what we're going to do is we're just going to dry brush across the weapons here with the copper, and the copper across the belt and things like that. Be very careful if you're dry brushing around the belt, because you don't want to get the dry brushing onto the skin. You want to try and keep that as safe as possible, so that so that we don't get the silver onto the skin tones. If you do make a mistake though, just put a little bit of water on a brush and you can remove what mistakes you've made. Now once the copper has been dry brushed, first of all, we're then going to move on and dry brush it up again for a highlight. Now for a highlight to the copper, instead of using just plain copper, for this we're going to mix copper and gold together. I've put the colours and the numbers at the bottom if you want to use the same ones, but pretty much around about 50-50. I'm using half and half, so half copper, half gold, and this is just going to be dry brushed just across the raised parts of that copper, so that we've got our base coat copper, then it's been darkened down by that dark tone, and then a highlight then with a little bit more of the a slight bit of gold involved as well. So the red we used, our original tone for the plume for his headdress. We're just going to go back and dry brush the red back on. Again, this is like a really cool mid-tone red. This is a nice in-between, so this is going to be perfect for highlighting. And as you see, we're going to highlight that. I'm just going to use a bloody red, and I'm only, if you notice, I'm not going all the way down the plume this time. I'm just focusing across the top area, so the dry brush is just catching the highlights, so we're just catching the top end of his headdress, because we don't want to go too far down and end up with one flat colour. We're just trying to make sure that we've got that colour sat only on the tips. And again, like I've been doing, and as you've been watching, if you wanted to, you can highlight again further and dry brush just on the very tips again. You could use a lighter red, or mix a little bit of a pink into your red, or a little bit of an orange into your red, depending on whether you want it to be a warmer colour, a cooler colour, anything like that. So we're just going to go back and just quickly dry brush as well the tips of the axe, just to get the silver back as well. So we're just going to go back to that gunmetal that we used and dry brush that. And I think that's pretty much the dry brushing done. So from there now, we're just going to paint back the colours that we originally painted, that we've toned down a bit. So going back in with the flat earth with the Vallejo across the tabard, just being very careful now, trying to leave a little bit of a gap so that it looks like we've got a shaded area around the metals as well. And just take your time and be very, very careful, especially up in the very tips here, just up in the very gaps here. We're going to go once more across the weapon, just to tie it back in, because we've put a little bit of a gold into this now as well. Soft tone, so I'm using an army painter soft tone. This is perfect now for something like an Agrax Earthshade if you're a Citadel user. And what this is doing, this is just putting a little bit of brown and again a little bit of colour back into the weapons, because we don't want them to just be flat. And from there again back to the tabard, and just using in small bits a beige brown now. So this is a highlight from that from the base colour that we used. Don't forget as well to just go around the wrist guards as well while you're painting this. So there we go, we're just trying to build up a little bit of a highlight, and then I'm just showing on the wrist guards here, just trying to put a little bit of a highlight around the edge and things like that as well. Try not to cover the whole wrist guard, because you want that tone between the light and dark, the highlight and the shade and things like that as well. And of course just across the bottom part of the back of his tabard, just like so. And for probably the most difficult bit, this will take a little bit of while, a little bit of practice, and there may be a few mistakes with this. I made a few mistakes myself. I'm using the polished gold. Something like Citadel's Retributor armor would be perfect for this. So trying to tie that copper and gold together, I'm painting the runes on his skin now with a gold. Like I say, take your time. This will incur a few mistakes, but don't worry too much. Just take your time. Use a wet brush if you make a mistake, and try to try to fix those mistakes. It does take a bit of practice, so don't worry, take your time. Once they are dry, just add in a quick layer of flesh tone, which again, if you're Citadel, you can use a Reikland flesh shade, that would work just as well. I'm just trying to put patches of flesh tone on here, because flesh tone is a forgiving shade, so once it's on the skin, because the skin is quite dark, it's not going to look out of place and things like that. But what it's just going to do is it's just going to tie that gold a little bit more into the skin tone so that it doesn't look like it's popping out too much. That should be all we need for the miniature itself, for the Fyreslayer. So if you wanted to continue and follow me through the basing, what I'm going to do here is create a lava style base. And as you'll notice with this guy, I've actually glued him onto a chunk of slate so that he looks like he's actually in an underground cave somewhere or something like that. So for this, we're going to go to that heavy charcoal that we used on the beard, again trying to tie the base into the miniature so that the colours tend to, or should, essentially like sit together and work well together so that nothing looks too out of place. Again, like I said, I was completely freestyling with this one, so let me know if you think the colours work, let me know if you don't think they work. I'm open to suggestion, guys. You know, I'm happy to take a bit of criticism and things like that. This is all learning for me as well as it is for you guys. I'm not the be-all to end-all expert on painting. I like things being all about personal choice. So once you've done the base color, you want to just darken him down with a shade. So for me, I'm using the dark tone again. And again, if you want to use Nuln Oil, that's the same sort of thing. You can use that as well. Once that's dry, you want to dry brush the stone. So we're going to dry brush that with a Stonewall grey, or again a nice mid-tone grey. Just be careful not to dry brush your toes or the miniature's toes onto the base as well. Just trying to create a little bit more depth, a little bit more to look at, and create a little bit more of a character to the base. So again, keeping that colour and keeping everything toned in. I'm going to go back to that Vallejo red, just back to that mid-tone red that I was using, and we're going to paint that across the bottom part of the base here. So we're not touching the rocks or anything like that. The rocks themselves are sticking out of the lava, and this is the first dark tone to our lava. And you're going to do this all the way around the base where it's not touching the rock on the front as well as the back, or whichever way you're painting your lava base, that's fine. The trick with painting a lava base is to keep painting it while it's wet. So don't let that red dry. Then use another colour. So I'm using a watered down bloody red. So the one that we use to highlight the plume. And then we're just going to go across, as you can see. We're going to paint that in, but we're just leaving a slight gap where the darker red reaches the stone, reaches the sort of slate. You see how we're leaving that gap? And the idea is, because this is wet and the base colour is wet, these two tones are going to dry into each other. So the same again, while the base is wet, I've gone now to use a dwarf skin. And while this is watered down, the whole idea is to create like this kind of feathering effect. So you can tap that colour, as you see, I'm putting the colour in, and then just tap in that colour so that the underneath colour creates almost like the colours to kind of blend together. So as you see, I'm just tapping that wet colour on top of a wet colour. So it looks like it's a mistake. But what you're doing is you're feathering those colours together. As you see, there's just light little points where those colours are reaching each other. And that's kind of what we want. So we're going on then to a brighter orange. So this is a lighter orange again. And as you see, we're just feeding our way further and further and further away from that rock. So we're just hitting the edges and just trying to get that colour and that tone. Again, the base should all still be quite wet, because you want that moisture to allow the colour to blend into each other. As you see here on the back, you can see just how much that colour is blending into each other now. So from the darker red to the lighter orange. Because these paints are thinned and because they're wet, they're going to dry into each other in a lovely, lovely way. So as you see, just trying to add a little bit more colour in between as well. Just to give a little bit more sort of creativity, a little bit more sort of colour and tone and things like that through, because we don't want it all to be just one straight layer, just trying to create a little bit more. So for the extreme highlight, for the extreme last ditch part to the lava, using a gold yellow, so a nice bright yellow as well. And again, just going in between some of these points, some of these bits, so that shows just how bright and how light it is. That's where I leave it. Now I know some people like to go up to, when you've got an extreme heat, some people like going up as high as white. That's absolutely fine. Like I said, personal choice. You paint however you want to paint. No one can tell you anything is wrong. I just don't. I like keeping it up to a yellow, and that's me. You know, that's personal choice. And finally, just to add a little bit more colour and a little bit more depth, just going to add a little dry brush of that bloody red just across the stone. And that's because the whole idea is this lava is so bright and it's so colourful that it's leaving a little bit of a colour imprint on that stone. And as you see, once it dries down and once it starts to dry down, those colours tone into each other. Lovely. And for the final stage, that's all you've got to do, that's all that's left, is to go around the base. And again, this is personal choice. I've seen people that enjoy painting around the base the same colour as they've painted the base. So for some people, they'd paint the lava all the way around. That's cool, that's cool. You know, I mean, that's completely your own way of doing things. Some people like painting brown, some people like painting red. I like painting black, purely just because it's got a little bit of a professional finish. It looks like it's completed. The other thing you can do is just, if you wanted to, once the black is dry, just add a few red and yellow droplets, just falling off that lava base. Just add it so that it looks like the lava is moving. And there he is, all complete. A unique style of Fyreslayer, completely done. As always, my friends, thank you very much for watching and tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this video.